I'm Herrick the Mildly Perturbed, a game designer and 20-year veteran of Amtgard and other LARPs. Amtgard V8 sought to streamline and modernize rules for a new audience. It's had astonishing longevity as the primary Amtgard system for about a decade, and it's seen huge growth in numbers in my own park of Silvermoon in Salem, Oregon. After pandemic lockdowns, Amtgard has seen a population downturn. V9's design follows many of V8's ideas regarding keywording and modernization, but its efforts to appeal to new players have run into design issues. Attempts to avoid gatekeeping have created analysis paralysis. New abilities are breaking the game because there's too much going on for players to resolve. V9 needs to implement its philosophical goals on a systems level with the bravery that V8 had in addressing root causes of problems and uprooting those systems rather than settling for band-aids. Now is the perfect time for Amtgard to get a refresh and welcome in new players. I've created a video essay series to accompany this pitch on Amtgard's design and how I think it can be improved. This is my pitch for the future of Amtgard. I propose a new direction, driven by new player experience, with a focus on empowered decision-making at every level of play, and with verisimilitude in player interactions. Empowered decision-making means validating player choices. Verisimilitude means things do what players think they'll do, and players fundamentally trust that everyone else is playing by the same set of rules they are. I'll give a non-example.
I'll use my special power to see into the future and find out where we should head next.
Hold on, you guys. I actually have another power. I can see into the future too, but better than Cap. Let me try.
Ha! Well. If it isn't the four ninjas.
Feel the fiery sting of my Tonfa of Takanoa! Hey kid, that knocks you down.
Nuh-uh, because my cloak is made of a titanium alloy that shields me from heat.
That's bullcrap. Titanium alloy, my ass.
This is a perfect example of how not to LARP. Whatever power Kyle had, Cartman was more powerful. Whatever Stan did, Butters ignored it. They weren't validating Kyle and Stan's choices, and they weren't playing by the same rules. But even if there was a rulebook that laid out Butters' titanium cape of heat resistance or Cartman's improved future sight abilities, a new player who hasn't read every word of that rulebook is still going to lose verisimilitude.
That's bullcrap.
You can't have a rulebook that lets an interaction like this take place. When a player loses verisimilitude, counterplay comes to a stop. There's no more give and take, and player interaction grinds to a halt. Abilities need to challenge players to think tactically, and we need to hold each ability to a high standard to merit its inclusion in the game. Ability bloat has led to inconsequential abilities and immunities that shut down player interaction so that even the abilities that are fun don't always work. And just saying no, like Butters,
Nuh-uh.
isn't really counterplay. Abilities are what make Amtgard great. It's the only LARP system that fully embraces character abilities without becoming a full-on hit point LARP, though V9's armor system is veering dangerously close to that. So, how do we make abilities in Amtgard shine, while still streamlining the experience for new players? I propose we examine the game system from the ground up and devise a new system that challenges players to make decisions using information they already have, starting from day one. I'll be designing the game with an eye to the perspective of a new player seeing it for the first time. I'll be taking a critical view of any aspect of the game that makes players feel bad, feel overwhelmed, or make this face. So let's imagine a new player on their first day. They saw people fighting in the park, they thought it looked fun, and they came over and asked to join. So far, every edition of Amtgard has failed at this first hurdle. What do you, as the local holder or regent, do here? Do you bombard them with 12 classes, all with abilities that they won't understand? Or do you tell them to play peasant, basically putting a dunce cap on them and saying, you don't get to play the real game yet until you've done your homework? Or do you ask them some leading questions about their playstyle and guide them to a smaller selection of simple classes that they might find fun? I think most experienced players would do that last one, but the game should really be doing that for you if it's designed well. The whole purpose of a class system is to dole out information slowly so that new players aren't overwhelmed. If you're having to do that yourself, then the class system isn't doing its job. So, what questions do you ask a new player to find their perfect fit? Or, to put it another way, what information does a new player already have the first time they see this game being played? They can see that some people are fighting with melee weapons, some people are fighting with ranged weapons, some people are fighting using mostly just their abilities, and some people are fighting with a mix of weapons and abilities. So this is where our class system starts. The first choice you make on day 1 is only between 4 classes, and the combat-heavy classes have no class abilities. This way, a new player knows that they are playing the full game on day 1 and have empowering choices to make without needing to learn a bunch of systems for how to use abilities. Even someone who just wants to get out there and fight is told by the game system that they're doing everything right. They're not putting anything to waste by ignoring abilities. But of course, if they want abilities, the other 2 classes will give them options for that. Obviously, the game will want to represent more than 4 archetypes, so I propose that our classes should level up into branching skill trees. The abilities will get more specialized as they progress, but not more powerful, and the level cap will be set to 4. We'll condense the credits so that getting to level 2 is very fast, maybe just a couple of weeks so that we can start getting to those sweet abilities. This will reduce gatekeeping and build each choice on top of a choice that players have already made, while still keeping the options intuitive and easy to understand. Another great feature of this system is that if a player decides to change their build, they don't need to start over from level 1. If you unlock Poison Arrow, for example, it's unlocked for both the Assassin track and the Archer track. If you want to switch tracks, you don't have to unlock it again. So even though your choice specializes you, experimentation is still encouraged, and even if you want to switch to a completely different class, a new max build is only 4 levels away. Now you might be thinking that 3 or 4 abilities per specialization seems a little low. Consider the fact that having fewer abilities lets each of them be more impactful and easier for new players to understand. I also think this choice is valid because previous editions of Amtgard have had plenty of classes with a very small number of abilities. Barbarian and Warrior used to just have 4 abilities each. Now, if Warrior or Barbarian only had 4 abilities, they should only have had 4 levels. They both had multiple levels where all they got was extra lives. So when we got rid of the lives system, why didn't we lower the level cap? By getting rid of these do-nothing levels, you reduce gatekeeping. But by adding more abilities, instead we increased gatekeeping and made classes that people liked for their simplicity feel like they're casters. Now, warriors are playtesting V9 and complaining that they feel like they need a spell list. This is getting out of hand. The model I propose would fix all of this. So now, let's go back to our new player who just wants to get out there and fight. They picked a warrior, they're swinging their weapons and having a great time. Then they hit somebody wearing armor and hear, "Taken," and their target goes on like nothing happened. Well, okay, I can physically see that they're wearing armor, so that makes sense, and I can put together how to beat it. I could aim at the unarmored hit locations, or I might think to myself, in real life, there's certain weapons that overcome certain types of armor. So I might ask someone, hey, is there a weapon that I can use to get around that guy's armor? And that person will say, here, try a great weapon, it's armor breaking. Then I'll go over to somebody wearing light armor to try out my new weapon, like maybe just a Gambison, and I hit them, and according to V8, nothing happens. It's the exact same result as last time.
That's bullcrap. Titanium alloy, my ass.
This is a super feel-bad to new players. When a new player tries an idea, we need that idea to work. They need positive feedback for trying something to solve a problem, especially something heavy and unintuitive and encumbering like a big two-handed weapon. And armor is one of the first tough problems that new players are going to encounter. So how do we tell that new player yes? Armor is a proficiency, and like it or not, new players will view proficiencies differently from class abilities. We need to balance armor as a proficiency. So I suggest that any weapon that requires extra dedication with each attack, like grates or bows or javelins, these abilities should have the penetrating quality to replace armor breaking and armor destroying. This quality means that the weapon straight up ignores light armors. Like the target isn't even wearing armor. No math to do, no multiple points, no counting down from 6. It just goes straight through it. This creates excellent counterplay. How does the person wearing armor respond to this? Well, we can give certain armors the heavy quality, meaning that they ignore the penetrating quality, if those armors are also encumbering to use, like the penetrating weapon. We want to make sure that this is visually communicated. Visual communication is very important. So let's set a standard for what constitutes heavy armor. Let's use the example of European 4-in-1 chainmail, 3/8-inch ring diameter, and 16-gauge steel, or non-overlapping 18-gauge plate mail covering 80% of a hit location. It's pretty easy to tell if your armor was designed to be lighter or heavier than these examples, so this will tell us if your armor gets the heavy quality. The heavy quality will not depend on your armor's point value, so I don't need to know if my target has taken damage to know if my ability is going to work. I just need to see the armor. Now, penetrating doesn't just come from proficiencies like great weapons, it also comes from abilities like Berserk. So I suggest that we make heavy armor work the same way. We'll take the improved armor ability from the V7 Warrior, which adds a point to any armor worn, and we'll add to that ability that it also grants the heavy property to any armor made of metal, even if it's a lightweight armor like aluminum or Japanese chain. We'll call this ability Mithril. Get it? So the barrier to entry for armor is now lowered, and the difference between wearing steel armor and aluminum armor isn't as great. This will encourage more people to wear it, but the armor is perfectly balanced, with a clear progression of counterplay for new players to start fighting against armor. I also think that the armor system should be lowered from 6 points down to 4 points, and there shouldn't be a laundry list of modifiers and point values. Instead, I suggest a streamlined judging system. You can view all this in my armor video, but on a basic level, this is necessary to reduce the amount of math that players have to do on the field. I don't care what you're wearing, if you get hit in the chest 5 times, you deserve your death. And I say this as someone who has worn 6 points of armor for hundreds of warrior credits. That about covers our martial system. So to talk about abilities, let's look at the perspective of a new player who wants to jump into the ability system. We'll have a class for players who kind of want to fight and use abilities, and we'll have a class for players who are all about that spellcasting. For now, I want to focus on the experience of the second one. You're a new player, you picked Wizard, now what? Well, you have a lot of math to do and a lot of choices to make between abilities that you've never tried and don't understand. So instead, I'm going to give spellcasters all of their spells and get rid of spell points completely. Trust me here, I'll get to how this is going to work. I'm going to replace the spell point system with the same system Archer uses for its specialty arrows. You'll have a pool of components, and you pick how many of each type to take. This is easy to understand with buff strips and spell balls, but how about verbals? Let's make an improved version of the same mechanic that is used for ensnaring vines. I propose that we use bracelets, which go on the casting arm. Each time you cast a verbal, one bracelet is exhausted and moved from the left arm to the right arm before you can cast again. This makes it so that spells can't be rapid-fired, but they don't need super long incantations to achieve that. Then we can have a variety of abilities like Steal Life Essence that will recharge those rings. Now what about reusable verbals like Heal? Well, I propose that we bring back implements. V6 had wands, which were basically weapons you couldn't attack with. In this version, you would hold them to cast reusable verbals like Heal, and it counts against your component pool. These will serve another function too. We want our class to really teach players how to play, so we want our mainline casting class to have no weapon proficiencies whatsoever. Instead, they'll have a spell called Barrier that lets them block with their implement so long as they're not using that implement to cast something else. This means that casters are more likely to use more flavorful weapons like the staff, since they're restricted to blocking only, and they have to use their magic to help their team. Okay, so giving players access to all of their spells might be fine for level 1, but what about higher levels? Well, our class system that I described before will naturally replace spell selection. Choosing your build will narrow down the spells that you have access to. And we can even communicate this by giving flavorful names to different builds. So in addition to Bard, Druid, and Wizard, we could have Abjurationist, Sorcerer, Evoker, each representing unique spell lists. But also, I think that the spell list shouldn't be so large in the first place. In fact, I think Amtgard really only needs less than half of its spells, and a max level player should only be hitting the field with no more than 10. Every edition of Amtgard has realized that a lot of LARP spell effects aren't fun, like standing still and counting, or out-of-game states, or abilities that just tell other players,
Nuh-uh.
like immunities, harden, imbue shield, and such. Heck, even our incants and spell ranges suck, so we need things like extension and swift to fix them. So get rid of all of that. We shouldn't be pointing at people and yelling while they run back and forth. That's not being a wizard, that's being a gym teacher. So let's shoot for the moon here and hold ourselves to a high standard. All spells and effects need built-in counterplay. No one is ever removed from the game, even for a second. No one is ever standing around counting, and every spell does something cool. If that's all true, players are going to love their spells, and each build will feel totally unique, even if each player only has a handful of spells or abilities. This also has the added benefit of making death the only thing that truly takes you out of the game, which means players aren't going to be taking a death when they're hit by crowd control. Death won't be trivialized anymore. Lowering the number of spells also lets us visually communicate buffs. If each class only has 2 buffs, and let's say one is offensive and one is defensive, we could have the offensive buff tie the strip to the player's weapon, and the defensive buff always tie to the shoulder of the sash. Then the buff strip will obviously match the color of your class sash, so every combination of strip color and location is unique, which means you can tell what the buff is as soon as you see the spell strip, and you always know where to look on the player for that spell strip. No one ever needs to say declare enchantments, and noobs can much more easily understand what's going on. Now we'll replace out-of-game states and counts with spell effects that give players a debuff and a task to complete to remove their debuff. A great example of this is the trap ability from V7. I've written a whole spell system like this, and I encourage you to read my chapters on conditions and spells. In short, if a new player is putting their dignity on the line to say one of our silly incants, I want to reward them with the most fun result I could possibly give them, and I never want to tell them,
Nuh-uh.
So what about a new player who still wants to fight with weapons but wants to see what the spellcasting system's all about? Well, we could have a spellcaster spec that imbues your implement to function like a weapon, a sort of battle mage, but I don't like the negativity in previous versions of Amtgard of making players sacrifice spells in order to take weapon proficiencies. So let's find a way to yes-and that player. We'll have a whole class dedicated to our spellcasting combatant archetypes. They'll get proficiencies and spells, but fewer components than our full caster. This is where we put our support archetypes like Healer, Necromancer, Paladin, and Anti-Paladin. As they choose talents, they'll specialize either more towards magic and get more components, or more towards fighting and get more proficiencies. I mentioned buffs earlier, and I hinted that I wanted to get rid of things that say,
Nuh-uh.
So how does a support class work with limited buffs and no protections or immunities? I suggest that Missile Block is the perfect replacement for protection from projectiles, and anything that protects you from spell balls. Any new player who hears somebody say immune or resist is going to say,
That's bullcrap.
It kills verisimilitude and player interaction. But when they see you slap an arrow out of the air with your hand, that's a badass ability, and they know what they have to do to beat it. They can be more accurate, or wait till you're distracted, or attack you in teams to get at your back. Other buffs should use the armor system directly, instead of using armor-like systems like Blessing of Protection or Resistance. Players will already be familiar with the armor system and how it works, so it makes it easier for them to understand what they're supposed to do about it. Saying something is like armor still leaves a lot of open questions for a new player. It has to literally be armor if you're going to buff someone with armor. V8 already did this by replacing sectional invul with armor in the case of Stoneskin. There's more to talk about in my vision of this draft, like how I want to separate abilities and magic again, or how I want to bring back Nirvana to get out-of-game players off the field, but I'll cut it here and direct you to my other videos for a more detailed breakdown of my design choices. Ultimately, this is my moonshot. Can we design a LARP with a robust ability system that onboards new players with empowering choices? That says yes to experimentation and counterplay at every level, and does away with janky mechanics that we've all just come to accept in LARPs, like standing around counting. Can we make a game that maintains the fast action of Amtgard's combat and brings that action to abilities that enhance the game rather than bogging it down? I hope you'll take the time to thoroughly read what I've written and consider what I've said here and in my other videos. This system was developed with care, respect, and love. Thanks for listening.